I just want to say hello and welcome to LA County Library's virtual program, Who We Are, which is the second installment to the virtual series of interfaith conversations titled Community Care, Libraries, and Faith Organizations in Conversation. My name is Kasha Samel, and I'm the American Indian Resource Center librarian for LA County Library, and I'm honored and excited to be your host for tonight. This event is part of our 4 roundtables exploring the intersections between community service and libraries and faith organizations. These roundtables are inspired by the idea that both libraries and faith organizations provide community care and service. The details of why and how our respective organizations provide service might differ slightly, but we hope to explore a middle ground where many types of community groups can meet in solidarity. And before we go further, I would like to share the land acknowledgement on behalf of Los Angeles County and LA County Library. Thank you, Isabel. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Kitch, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respects to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge that the settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, cultures, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands, and we are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, Kitch Nation, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. And before we head into this discussion, we are asking that everyone joining us for this event abide by these agreements. The purpose of these agreements is to ensure that we can maintain a space and a conversation that is healthy and respectful towards everyone. So everyone is welcome here, and we are all equals. We come to listen and learn, not to convince or convert. We leave our assumptions and our disagreements behind, and we will not compare one set of ideals to another's practices, but instead compare ideals with ideals and practices with practices. We will accept controversy only with civility. And now that we've all agreed to that and abide by the agreements, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Roy Twobears Delarosa. He is the spiritual advisor and the keeper of Eagle staff for the Native American Veterans Association, also known as NAVA. He is Yaqui, Apache, and is recognized by the Native American Orthodox Church of America. He is a United States Marine Corps veteran and has been a member of NAVA for 19 years. And in 2001, he was the acting vice president. He is a public speaker and the founder of Indian Talk in California, lecturing at high schools and universities on Native cultures and his life experience as an urban Indian. Our next panelist, Najeeba Syeed, is the executive director of interfaith at Augsburg University. And for more than 2 decades, Syeed has been a professor and expert practitioner in the fields of conflict resolution, mediation, and interfaith studies, and has published articles on faith and community-based conflict resolution. She is an award-winning educator, has taught extensively on interreligious education, and previously served for 10 years as an associate professor at the Claremont School of Theology. In 2021, she served as chief of staff to Los Angeles City Council member Nithya Raman. And finally, I would like to introduce Rabbi Heather Miller. She is the founder of Keeping It Sacred, global community dedicated to the intrepid exploration of sacred texts, the practice of meaningful rituals, and the unwavering pursuit of social justice. She is an executive board member of the Women's Rabbinic Network and immediate past president of the Interfaith Council of Greater Rancho Santa Margarita. She has served as spiritual leader for a congregation across the United States, including the world's first LGBT founded Jewish synagogue, and recently has been granted a 2022-2023 fellowship from the Center for Rabbinic Innovation. So I want to say thank you to our panelists for making the time and space for us to have this conversation, and we'll go ahead and get started with our discussion. Cool. And then just to let the audience know, we are, it looks like we are having technical difficulties with connecting to our other panelist, Roy. So I hope that you can have patience with us while we wait for him to join, but we'll kickstart it with a question. And I guess we'll pick Rabbi first. For the first question, what called you to your role as a service provider, and how did you discover the place you wanted to work?
So role as a service provider, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today, and hello to everyone. I saw a few people who I know in the participating today, so thank you. And it's great to be here with Professor Najeeba Syeed, a good friend of mine. So what called me to, there is sometimes people say that religious folks get called to the profession, called to the clerical way of life. I just wanted to be a helper. I have seen a lot of pain and suffering in the world. When I was 10 years old, I had a tumor on my left ovary, and understood suffering from a very young age. Just really asked a lot of questions about why me, why does suffering exist, why does it happen? And I just wanted to help heal people, help be with people in their suffering, and do whatever I could to bring wellness to the world. So to this community, especially. I'm a fourth generation Angelina, and so Los Angeles is definitely where I wanted to do that work.
Cool. Okay, we love hearing that. Like, we love Los Angeles, so we're glad to hear that you're a fourth generation Angelina. And thank you, Roy, for tuning in. I guess we'll pass the baton over to Roy. And the question is, goodness, okay. What called you to your role as a service provider, and how did you discover the place you wanted to work?
I've been asked that question many times. I'm a tribal elder, being a head man of my family, which means I am the oldest surviving son of my great-grandfather's great-grandfather. So my role is a great one in my family and my community, particularly the Native community. But I found out that this came to me at a very young age. And I think we need to start to understand that. Children are gifted. And oftentimes we don't appreciate that. And in my youth and as a child, I can remember being very sensitive to the things that were surrounding me, nature, coming in contact with other elders, my family. And I think at that time, I found it very concerning. I didn't know how to describe it, how to hold a discussion about that, but which is typical in the nature of tribal people. I was silent and became an observer. And little by little, I began to see that I did have this nature to kind of be sensitive to others, understand them, and eventually, as I become an adult, I realized that I had this gift, and I feel that it is not just consigned to me. I think in the world that we know today, many are gifted with this, but they remain silent. So when people ask me about this, I realized it at a very young age. I realized that being a person that had this sensitivity, that it was my duty to serve and to be helpful and generous in any manner I could, particularly when I came in contact with individuals that were having difficulty in their life, had a need of someone to extend their hand or just be present and listen.
Thank you, Roy. I'm not sure if Rabbi or Najeeba want to comment on that. If not, we'll go ahead and ask Najeeba the same question. What called you to your role as a service provider, and how did you discover the place you wanted to work?
So that's a great question. And for me, I always describe it as a vocation. And vocation is sort of like the vessel for me is peace building. So at one time, it was running organizations that served Asian Americans in Los Angeles. Another time, it was an organization that did conflict resolution in schools in Pasadena. Then it was running an institute. So I've had a really wide range of experiences. What I would say the thread through all of them was coming from and immigrating to the United States when I was 3 with my parents and becoming a citizen when I was 15, in particular because my family came from a region of the world where there was a lot of violence, and my community was so kind of found in Los Angeles. The mosque that I go to, Islamic Center in Koreatown, was a place that was all of Los Angeles. So on the weekends, we had a food pantry that serves our local community that happened to be mostly elders who are Christian from the Korean community, because that's who's around us. So I think what's really important for becoming a service provider is to know that it may look different and that I can be a service provider. Sometimes I get paid for it, sometimes I don't. That any of us can be of service. It could be helping your neighbor from, if you know that week they need some support with whatever that might be. So I just wanted to kind of share that I think whatever and however you're motivated to be a service, of service to others, makes you a service provider, even if that's not your full-time job.
Amen.
Thank you for that. And if you haven't seen our first session, it happened last Wednesday, and Najeeba, you touched on something that one of our panelists had talked about, and he was discussing how it's just like you can be whatever background, as long as you're willing to assist. People will not care where you come from or like what you believe in. It's just in your like faith and your guide to do good is what people will recognize and connect with. So thank you for sharing, guys. So our second question: what skills and training make someone good at your job? And I'm not sure who would like to go first.
Sure, I'd be happy to go first. And I bet the skills that make us good at one job make us good at most jobs. I would say the most important thing for me in my work, I've been doing mediation and conflict resolution, as I said, for 30 years, since I was in college. And I think one of the most important things is listening and meeting people where they are and understanding that sometimes it's important to guide people if they need a solution. If they're asking for, let's say someone is looking for a referral for housing, then that's important to give them that information. But even as they're asking for information, I found it's really important just to listen to what people are saying. And I often tell my students or mediators that I train, the most important gift you can give a human being in this moment in time is the full capacity of your listening. And I share that because we're so challenged in time. I have 2 kids. I have a device. They have even more devices than I have. And, just taking that time, whether it's professionally or even as a family, to listen to each other. And I'm really just like so moved by that as a gift that people tell me. And we know in conflict resolution, when they ask people, well, what did you want out of the conflict? What they found is, the studies show, is people don't care about the outcome. They want to know that they were listened to in the process. So I think that's really powerful. We actually want to be seen and heard in our full dignity.
That's a great answer and comment. And it's really hard to listen. And that's something that not everyone realizes how difficult it is. But when you do have listeners like our faith leaders and our teachers and elders, it's something really special. On that note, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to a rabbi.
Sure. Yeah. I was actually had listening on the list that I just jotted down. I was like, oh, that's a good question. Being reflective is also one. Actually, the rabbinical school was saying, what should we look for in candidates to become a rabbi? People would say like they should know Hebrew, things that like kind of practical things, like they should know what summer camp is. They should know, what the 5 books of the Torah are, whatever. But for me, like all of that stuff can be taught. I think the most important thing is to be reflective, to aside from listening, which I heard you say, is being really reflective about who you are, what you're experiencing, what other people are going through. And so listening in that way too. And then what goes with that too, and with the listening and the reflection is curiosity. Being really curious. So we're often called the people of the book, the Jewish community, but often I like to be called the people of the question, right? Because we're always asking questions and being really curious about experiences, not curious as like setting traps for people to walk into and then, haha, I'm proving my argument. But like genuine curiosity of, oh, what does it mean for you to have that particular life experience? What are you going through right now? How can I be of help to you? Do you want to hear advice, or do you want to have a listening ear in this moment, right? The things that, make you a good friend too, is just that curiosity and ability to be present with people.
Thank you, Rabbi. How about Roy?
This is all great. Very interesting. I always have to go back to my childhood. My mother was a very prayerful woman. She was very religious. She made certain that all of her children became prayerful. She always made certain that we praised God. She always made certain that we learned to share, we learned to fast, and we developed certain values around that. Once again, being a sensitive person as I was and growing up led to wanting to engage with people, to be helpful. And I never thought of it as a path, a trail that I would follow throughout my life. It was one that was within me, stayed with me. And after I served in the military, I decided to educate myself. And most that know me don't know. I don't share it always, but I was in the operating room for over 47 years. And I think what led me to care for people and to be in an environment of healing was the spiritual calling, because it made it easy for me to put myself in a place to help others, to be there in a manner that I could help a surgical team heal someone, bring them to health. But the most important part was to be there present for their death, and be there present, holding their hand, in a non-judgmental way, knowing that what was about to happen was an event that's going to happen to all of us, which is return to the world we come from. So it was my nature to end up in a world that I did in the operating room. I think I logged over 250,000 surgery cases. I specialized in emergency trauma services and always remembered my roots. A lot of the doctors and surgeons I worked for would always say, you've always been a very quiet man. We're going to miss you. You've always been very humble. And that was because I was taught not to be a prideful person, but to always be humble and to learn from others. And every day was a day of learning. So no matter where I am and where I'm engaged and where I'm walking, and now I do hold the title of spiritual advisor for the Native American Veterans Association. That was because my successor, Tony Littlehawk, he reached out to me and said, Roy, I would like you to follow in my steps because soon I'm crossing over. He was telling me that soon his life was coming to an end. And I said, well, what should I do? And he goes, what you've always done. Pray with others, pray and let them pray in their own way and visit the sick. So that's what I've been doing. So when anyone asks me about a career that I have, it is currently being a prayerful man and being there spiritually present for a fellow human being.
Can I
Thank
share
you.
a reflection on that as well? If that's okay, Roy. This idea of, physical healing and spiritual healing and just wellness, right? Like I served at UCLA Medical Center as a chaplain.
Mhm.
And a lot of times the way that they treat the chaplains is part of the care team.
Mhm.
Right. So we have social workers, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have, a spiritual care team as well. And all of that is what we can use, all of those resources, all of those angles and ways of thinking about the human being as a whole person can really help with the outcome. Even if the outcome is death, as you mentioned, right? We know that some people are, deemed, beyond medical saving at that point. But the healing that can come for the family as well and for the individual, I think is really connected and related.
Mhm. Yes, that's very true. And I hope that no one thinks it odd, but being there with a person that is preparing to cross over is an experience that is so moving that you will never forget it. And I mean one stranger to another. And that's what usually the situation was. And oftentimes I would be the last one they would have an opportunity to speak to because their family were not present or things happened so suddenly. So I found that to be very beautiful. And I hope that in some way, somehow, that I was truly a blessing to them at that moment.
It was very touching. And like Najeeba said, these are all skills and characteristics that just make you great at your job, any job, but being a friend, listening skills and reflecting, these are all community skills that we want in our community members. And I just want to say thank you for being there for our communities and taking on this tough role. I know it could be emotionally taxing and definitely hard. But I think it's great for us, the audience and myself, to hear this and how it is to be on the other end of receiving this service and this gift for the community. We'll go ahead and go to the third question. What do you?
I heard someone say recently that when you become a peacemaker, you lose your own peace. When you were saying about, you hold it on your shoulders and you hold what other people are holding. So, as a peacemaker, as someone in healing in the community, it's really important to try and find that balance too. So maybe I would add that as part of the list of having good boundaries is kind of important for our jobs, of being able to hold the space and hold and also not lose our own peace too much, even if it's inevitable in some ways.
Did anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be learned, and I would just encourage all of the people who are listening today to think about a time when you felt really listened to and felt really appreciated. And the reason I say that is because, again, this is something any of us can do. Obviously, I have training And I also would encourage people, if you want to become a peacemaker, we have all over Los Angeles County, we have the dispute resolution program, which has centers all over the county. And so there are ways that you can get training, sometimes low cost or even free if you volunteer. And so I hope that this conversation between us opens up the door for people to think about, well, what did I learn today that maybe I could become a resource for in LA County, or maybe it's at the local library. But sorry to put a plug in there, but I did want people to I did want to let people know there is the LA County Dispute Resolution Program that has services throughout the county. I used to run one of those centers, so I just wanted to open up the door to that. And yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing the resources. Any resources librarians love to share, so that's right on par with the library. Anyone else want to add to this conversation that's taking on a really beautiful path, I believe?
Yes. I'd like to say that I agree with Rabbi Miller and her comment. It's very true. At a certain time, you become so inclined to take on a burden that can just lead you to sleepless nights, questioning whether or not you did the right thing, wondering if perhaps you could have did more, what you could have done better. And the more I pondered on that, I realized that now I had to find a way to release these things, so that anytime there was a situation that would occur, such as I described, I found it easier later to become very prayerful and conscious of what just happened was out of my complete control, in the hands of a greater being, and that this individual that was leaving this physical earth was now moving on to a spiritual life. And I think that sometimes we look at death in a bad way, where truly it is the gate to a beautiful and spiritual life that is undescribable. And I think that brought me a lot of peace when I started to think about it that way. Because no matter how many holy men, women I heard speak on this very subject, I found out something that was extraordinary from them. That sometimes they had to borrow the courage of the person that was about to die, just to remain there and to be silent, prayerful, and present. And that's something I'll always remember. So it didn't happen overnight. I realized that there were borders, and it became something that I consciously made a decision that no matter how grievous the situation, that person was going to go to a place so beautiful we can't possibly imagine. And it's hard. Yes, it's hard for those who are left behind and will grieve. It will be difficult. There will be many tears, yes. But the more I gave the consideration to these people, and I decided that no matter what, I would never withhold myself either from being present and being with them. Yes.
I love that. And I love this idea of, that we're talking about death here, and just this idea of when my stepdad, my first stepdad, he died in 2009, and he died of pancreatic cancer. May his memory be a blessing, Michael Posen. He died in an apartment that my mom and he were renting. And as they were, after he died, my mom moved out, and I was like, wow, someone's going to move in there and they're going to like have the room where he died in. Like, that's interesting, Maybe I said a little more than that.
Yes.
And my mom, I listened to my mom as well, right? And she said to me, she said, well, it's no different than if a baby was born in that room. And I just thought that was so beautiful to orient yourself to kind of the mystery of life and the beginning of life and the end of life, and kind of wrapping those together, I think was really wonderful, because it like took the fear out of it, and it took the mystery and the scariness out of it that so often we see in the media, right? And it just gave it that beautiful context. And then as a rabbi later, I was studying some texts, and in our sacred text, in our tradition, there's a saying that there are certain sounds in the world that reverberate throughout the entire universe. And those are the birth of a baby and the death of a person. And so it just, again, it's connecting those pieces and saying, that death is no different than if a baby was born in that room. And just, both absolutely sacred moments, but not one valenced positively and one valenced negatively, just holy, and to be present. I'm just moved by your presence there, Roy.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And if we haven't shared it yet, we'll be sharing the conflict resolution that Najeeba shared in a moment. But we'll go on to our next question. What do you find challenging and rewarding about your work? That's tough.
So I find challenging is that there's always conflict. So I tell people I would love to work myself out of a job, but the challenge is that it's just, when you are a service provider, you're often addressing a human need, and that human need exists as long as humans exist. So that's kind of something to be ready for, is that, if you found a way to get rid of conflict in our world, let me know, because, or the needs that we've been talking about so far, whether it's being there for people, at bedside through a crisis, or whatever it may be that the service we provide. And I think one of the powerful things about service providers connected to our spiritual or worldview is that you can think about how we can draw on whatever our practices are for support. So I work in contexts, and I've trained graduate students that work in hospitals as chaplains, or in the military, or just in many settings. And they're not always of the same tradition as the person they're assigned to. I think that's something that Roy was talking about. You could be a Muslim chaplain and be working with a Buddhist family that's going through a crisis. My son was in Children's Hospital, in and out of Children's Hospital for 4 months after an accident. And I was getting sort of support by whoever was there. One day it happened to be a rabbi. And so I think what's really powerful is that spirituality, you don't have to have the same background to be supportive of each other. I mean, ideally, we all have those leaders, whether we have a religious identity. Some of us don't have a religious identity, so we're parts of other communities. I just wanted to mention that I think that's really powerful. So something that has been really helpful for me when I'm in a difficult situation or conflict has been learning about breathing techniques from different traditions. I just had a Zen Buddhist priest come speak to my class, and he talked about breathing. And I have some of those teachings in my own tradition, but it's this idea of practices, and how do you deal with stress, and how do you engage in reducing stress. So I just wanted to share that some of the tools that I've learned over the years, some of them come from my tradition, and sometimes I've learned them by interacting with people of other backgrounds. And like I said, they can be religious, or they don't have to be religious. I've learned things like, for instance, not just breathing, but also thinking about an alternative view of where a conflict could go. So instead of getting bogged down in envisioning a different way to think through a conflict. And those are all skills that I think are really powerful for the work that I do. I would say that the most important thing in my work is hope. And when I come into a room, and if people are in a conflict situation, whether it's at a school, a university, whether it's international. I've traveled also and done this work. Once hope has left a situation and people don't have hope anymore, then it becomes difficult to resolve that conflict. And if I don't embody hope and bring hope into the situation, I can tell in scenarios where I've lost hope, everyone in the room kind of, you feel the energy go down. So I would just share with people who are dealing, whether it's conflict situations or a difficult thing in their life, what are the practices in your life that help sustain you and help you get through conflicts in life? And sometimes the conflict isn't with other people, sometimes the conflict is with you. And we talk about this as problem solving for one. Maybe you don't know, maybe you're stressed out about a decision that you're trying to make in your life. Or like me, you have a son that's 17 and looking at colleges, and I have an agenda for where he should go. And I think I know where he should go, and he has an agenda. So sometimes the conflict isn't even between us, but me, before I talk to him about how to engage and think about that, how have I done the work to come into that without bringing my own stress so that he has to carry that as part of his process?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. But yeah, hope is something really important, and it's something that we don't really think about, but it's very vital to the conflict resolution, as you mentioned, and continuing on with just having a tough day. Would either Roy or Rabbi like to continue on this conversation, or would you like for me to repeat the question?
Well, I think today, and still today, I've been away from the field now for many years, and I still see that there's a difficulty when it comes to Western medicine and our patients, and understanding that at a certain time, the most important thing any individual can have at a point in their life when they know that now, for instance, a patient in palliative care or hospice, there needs to be an understanding that there are religious traditions that can manifest themselves at any given time. And sometimes families are not allowed, right? They're just not allowed to come forth and are given the time that they require to practice their religious traditions, whether it's gathering around a patient, holding hands and being prayerful, or bringing in a holy person to bless them, bringing someone to sing a holy song for them. These things that remain tradition in all over the planet, it seems we struggle with it here in the West. Western medicine does not provide that opportunity where families can teach. An emergency room doctor and physician can teach a surgeon that what is needed now, because nothing else can be done, is for us to be here now at this moment, blessing our loved one in our traditional way. And it is very difficult. That is something that I would believe that, and hope that some way medical schools will address it with the physicians that are going to be practicing medicine in the very near future. And I know that some universities, medical schools are reaching out to the communities and asking for people to come and to speak and lecture on their religious beliefs, their mores, their traditions, so as they'll be open to it. But I even found out that just before I left, as I said many years ago, it was still a struggle. So I would hope that that would change, but I found that to be one of the most dominant challenges.
For me, I love this question. It's we would reframe it as the oys and joys of being a rabbi. So what are the oys? The oys are for me. So I teach, right? And I teach online. I teach all kinds of classes from Talmud to Introduction to Judaism and everything in between. And really the Oys are scheduling, getting information out, making sure everyone has the link, making sure that people know that, you know, the programs are happening, right? If everyone knew that the program was happening, it would be great. You know, like if I didn't have to worry about that, that would be amazing. And it is right on our website, but it is, it's hard to make sure that, you know, I don't want to expect everyone to check our website every week, even because it changes every week. Not changes, but we add to it every week. So the scheduling, the information dissemination is pretty difficult. But and I knew a professor once who said that you know, the university is not paying me to teach, they're paying me to grade, right? So like, I don't grade anyone anymore. Like I did teach middle school, I did teach high school, I have taught, you know, graduate level classes for grades, and I've taught in religious school for like all the way down to preschool. I and adult education. So I've taught 9-month-olds and 99-year-olds and everyone in between. So the teaching is not hard. It's joyful for me, and so the only way I can't say like, is a baby naming better than a wedding or even better than, you know, a funeral, right? That you're translating somebody's life into the values that they lived. Like that's a sacred task. And I'm not going to rank like which one's better, but I think that what it comes down to is the joys of my path in life is connections, is really like connecting people to the text, connecting people to their roots, connecting people to a new way of looking at something, connecting people to the sacredness of life, and to each other, and to their power in this world, right? Keeping it sacred. We do talk a lot about empowerment and empowering people in, as Professor Najeeba Syeed said, you know, this idea that, you know, getting people into their strength of knowing that they can make a difference in the world. Anybody can make a difference, and connecting people with that strength to make a positive difference in their community. So our social justice work really does hope to kind of empower people in that way. So just connecting people is a total joy, and sometimes to each other in a wedding. All of it.
I have to say, as a librarian and like just working with LA County Library, I think a lot of us find joy in connecting with people too. And like this space, for example, is connecting people in the audience. So it is really rewarding, and it really keeps you motivated. Would any of you guys like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really excites me, because part of what we wanted to talk about was community care, is the need for intergenerational spaces. And I think Roy has kind of talked about that a little bit already. And that's one of the beauties of the library. That's one of the beauties of spaces or houses of worship. That's one of the beauties of just public areas in general is, and I think one of the kind of the studies about places, educational spaces, or houses of worship that are successful and institutions that are successful are those that actually mix generations together, or people learn together across generations. And I wanted to point that out because I think sometimes it's learning from elders, but we also learn from children. Yes. I learned from my children. My 15-year-old said, "Yeah, we're ready to run the world." I was like, "Okay, that's good to know." She has it all figured out, but it's really true. And I think I wanted to kind of think about that too, is that our community, what is and how do we define community? Because sometimes it can be so segmented, and we do need to have, whether it's services that are, you know, special for teens, targeted to seniors, that are working with young families that have young children. I work with institutions that do all of that kind of work. I also think one of the things that's missing is thinking about, well, what is and how do we build a community of different ages? And that means sometimes when you have events, who can get there? Is it accessible? And that's one of the beauties of Zoom, is that I think for my family, we started doing like birthday parties with everyone on Zoom during the pandemic, obviously it was a really difficult time. But one of the things I thought was so beautiful is like my 2-year-old nephew in Long Beach would make faces at his grandmother in DC, who's in her 80s and can't really, is now in a situation where she doesn't get out of the house that much. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that expanding our definition of community, not just to make it of different religious faiths or different backgrounds, but really think about ages and what appeals to each sector of our age, but are there ways that we can be intentional about building programs and conversations that include people across ages interacting with one another?
I love that. Our entire family, we call it family education program. We don't call it religious school. We don't call it, we don't take kids, put them in a classroom and, have the rabbi go teach them. Actually, we talk with parents and we talk about who their child is, again, starting with listening, and then talking with them about the upcoming holiday and some questions that they might launch with their child, and to have like a really deep, interesting conversation cross-generationally within the family. And then we encourage the kids to do like a presentation of some sort. We call it an exhibition, right? So, the same way you might go to an art gallery and see an art exhibition, or you might go to a science fair and see a science, all of the different science fair projects. We encourage the kids to do that. And then when they come into our space on a Friday night, they teach the adults what they've learned and how they understand the holiday. And it puts them totally in this driver's seat where they can, share what they thought, and then they can listen to the elders in their space about what has been meaningful to them. And it just launches this depth of conversation. And to do that where kids are teaching adults of other families or single adults or, elders, I just think it's such a beautiful way of letting kids know that they count, that their voices matter, that they are affirmed in all that they are. And it gives them that sense of confidence and, again, empowerment and ownership over, that we trust them to carry tradition forward in the way that they understand it as well. So totally love that. And also, if we can get in interfaith work in there as well. One program that I ran, we had interfaith leaders come to the religious school, and they were asking the kids about the Jewish traditions, like, oh, what is this word you said, Shema? What does that mean? Or like, oh, why do you stand during this time? And the kids are like, oh, that's because of this and because of that. And it just puts them in this role of like feeling confident, like they know this stuff. They are vessels for the tradition. They are able to kind of carry it on. They have that dignity. So putting them in that position has been really, really exciting. Maybe it's because I grew up in an interfaith family that it's always great to see how different people think about different prayers. So when someone asks the kid, like, why do you wear a yarmulke? You could have like 800 reasons for that. So I just love that, like just unearthing all of those answers and including kids' voices or everyone's voice is really, really crucial. So thank you for that. That was a great thought as well.
Thank you. Actually, our last session for community care, there was a reverend who did share that she believes we can definitely give children more responsibilities and more chances and opportunities to do community work and to just excel in some of the things that other parts of the world are allowing them to. So this is great. And I think we can definitely use this for our libraries. Like, let's start an exhibition like everywhere.
Yes.
Yes.
If I might say, in the Native community, if you ever have the opportunity and you see postings that there is a powwow, which is simply a word that means gathering. The beauty of it is that if you grow up as a child in the sacred circle, and I've seen it in the sacred gathering, you're growing within a community that is very spiritual. It's constructed that they must show and engage with elders and show great respect for elders because they are there to learn. And as we are celebrating and the music is playing and the young people are dancing and the elders are dancing, we're always remembering that this is forming the community and strengthening the children spiritually, and they absorb it. I've seen so many children grow up within the community in the sacred circle. Now, most Native people say back home because they're not urban Indian like myself. But when they say back home, they talk about living in the countryside, in rural communities. And I found out that this community and the very spiritual events that occur are that they gather in the springtime after the hard winter to celebrate and to gather news of what has been going on in the tribe, in the clan, among the families. And sometimes there's sadness and grief because elders somehow passed away during the winter. But then there's joy because children were born, the good news, the sense of family. It warms your heart. And then they gather in the fall to make sure that all the elders and the families that are in need have what they might need to get through a hard winter. And that comes from rituals that have been practiced for the millennia for the Indian people. They have sacred events even later as an elders has knowledge that he may not be walking on this earth much longer, and he might come out to speak, and oftentimes they practice what I mentioned in our last meeting, in our last talk, is a giveaway. And that is when they start to give away their possessions. They call up people in the community, people that they want to honor, people that they say, I want to bring this young person up here because they've been doing good things. They've been practicing good things. They are grown in this sacred circle, and spiritually now they're intact. And I want to make sure that he has this for me, that it will journey on with him, with his good human being. So children are honored, young adults are honored, elders are honored. We celebrate together. And I think that's absent from the Western community that we have now, our modern society. We need to strengthen our communities with sharing our spirituality, our ideas in a joyful way, so everyone can learn from one another. And that's what I've always found interesting, especially in the gatherings, because you will have natives there from over 100 different tribes with different traditions. And I just want to say, I truly believe that all humanity on this planet are from the same tribe. We are all from the same tribe.
You know what I love about that too is this idea about material history, right? We're creating this material history of our own lives and then passing it down to, or passing it on to others. Like I'm sitting here, this is a painting that one of my grandmothers made, right? I'm sitting here, there's chairs right here that were my great grandparents that we recovered, right? This idea of upcycling. I was just part of this LA Fashion Week thing yesterday, a showcase by Tara Subkoff, and talking about upcycling. And what I love about this idea is that we're creating ritual, like material history, and we're able to pass it down, right? At a bar mitzvah ceremony, when the parents pass to the child the Torah, right? It's like a passing of the baton. We're like actually placing that sacred item in their hands, and we say, don't drop it, but like we place it in their hands, and literally don't drop it, but also like we hope that they carry it forward, right? So the creation of this material history and knowing, having kids know that they are respected and honored and recognized for their for who they are, as you mentioned, right? Like the recognition.
Yes.
It shows love, and it's not like materialistic love, right? Because for some people it's like you give them a toy because you love them or whatever, but it's not that. It's actually it's showing them respect and that they're part of tradition, as we say in Judaism, the Shalshelet HaKabbalah. They're this next link on the chain of tradition.
Yes.
So it's honoring who they are. So I love that again. Yeah.
I was gonna also answer it a little bit as having the immigrant experience myself. I think one of the things that's really powerful is for us, as for some immigrants in my experience, is some of our spiritual teachings, spiritual practices, or whatever it may be, our cultural practices get interrupted. And so what I thought is, so I just wanted to share, those are my mother's paintings. In her 70s, she took up Chinese landscape picture paintings. And then next to me that's my family tree that goes back more than 15 generations. And part of the reason that that's important for some of us who come from the kind of, and I wanted to share, like, it's a privilege to be able to know your family history. Not everyone gets access to it. Some of us, for different reasons, don't have access to it. And what I think is really, what I just wanted to kind of share is sort of like a story with my dad. I would ask him, well, where did you go when you needed? There weren't therapists in Kashmir 100 years ago, 50 years ago, but they would go to spiritual leaders. And it wasn't always someone who was the most religious in terms of their teachings, but people who were good listeners. So he would say, I would go to a religious or spiritual leader, and I would say, and I would tell him, this is how I'm feeling. And he would say, go to the mosque in the morning and take your shoes off and walk barefoot in the grass in the dew at dawn. And that was a kind of a prescription. I think, like Roy was saying, it was a prescription. And those kinds of prescriptions have been handed down for generations. So if you look at my family tree, it was in our tradition, we were spiritual leaders. So you taught what's interesting is it's all men until my dad added our generation the women. But I think what's powerful in terms of who is recorded, my grandmothers were both spiritual leaders. They were both poets. Within the Muslim tradition. So I have come from a very long line of powerful women, but who writes history is also important. Whose name gets put on the family tree, it's also another story. But I wanted to share that with you because I think part of the immigrant experience is that there's this constant trying to remember, trying to gather those stories, trying to connect again, because I didn't grow up with grandmothers. My grandmothers lived across the world and I saw them twice in my life before they passed away. So just kind of wanted to add that to the conversation, is that we make our histories, but we also, some of us may have more physical access, or those records may not exist, or they may for so many different reasons. And that is a constant, for me, a constant thing to try to recreate and engage and think about. And I do think that that's one of the beautiful things about the knowledge of books and libraries, is being able to connect with those histories of our own, but also with the histories of so many other people. I'm on my family tree now, my kids are on it too, and then someone else will keep that family tree going. And all of that is partly keeping those stories alive. And maybe one day I'll walk barefoot at dawn outside in the grass. I don't have grass. I have all cactus and succulents in my backyard in Los Angeles. So I may get some pricks from the cactus. But I think I just want to kind of put in the immigrant experience. It's both a challenge and a beautiful thing to kind of recover those histories or keep them alive and that chain connected.
So
I'm glad
glad
you said that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Working with veterans who have PTSD, I'll frequently go to the VA hospital. And what I found out, that their injury is spiritual. Their spiritual injury, their moral injury is greater than their physical one. And I found out the common thread among them, if they've failed to engage anymore in society. It begins at home with their parents, no longer engaging in the home, in conversations, being absent. It happens among their own personal families, their spouses, their children. And before you know it, they're removing themselves from society completely. They're removing themselves from community. And one of the healing things for them is to convince them to re-engage and re-enter community, to begin to socialize on the smallest levels. No matter what it is they're doing, they must do it. They must continue to practice it and practice it till they have invented themselves and engaged in their spiritual life and realize that now what happened in the past is in the past, and that's where it needs to stay. And I can go on with a new life, a joyful life, as long as I recognize that it is the spirit and not the physical body that is most important, right? So I wanted to mention that because I observe that in them, the men and women who suffer from this PTSD, but that is very common among them. Very difficult to return to community, but when they do have success.
Speaking of, entering community and re-entering community, and this idea about maybe not having material history, the luxury of having material history passed down. At times when I officiate for conversions, right? It's not really even officiation. It's, you serve on this rabbinic panel of 3 people. And when someone is deemed converted, when they convert to Judaism, there's often, we do this on the campus of the American Jewish University often, and they have a library there, and they have a used books shelf. And so what I do, this is just something I started for the people who I work with, is I take them to the used bookshelf. It's usually the library gets books from people who have passed away and their families don't know what to do with the books, or congregations donate like 50 copies of prayer books and they don't know what to do with it. So it's perfect for someone who just converts and they need to, they don't have that material history from their own biological family. It's great for them to get that material history from the community. So that is a really beautiful thing to be able to offer. And actually recently a member in our community passed, and her son called me and was like, we have all of this stuff. What do I do with it? And I was like, someone just converted. It's perfect. Let me bring it to her. And they ended up meeting, and it's just a wonderful way for people to feel connected, like you're saying, right? Like, the fabric of the community, to weave them into that fabric of the community, and to do that through material history or material possessions of sacred objects is one of the ways to do that.
Yes.
I was wondering, part of what I heard as a theme from the 2 panelists is, again, the emphasis on community care and self-care and those connections. And I wanted to point out, because I do work with undergraduate students now, and I have my kids are teens as well as just for across age groups, is the epidemic of loneliness. We now know that loneliness is been charted as, at that level, the Surgeon General of the United States and other people who study causes and concerns around mental health. And I do think some of that can really be connected to accessibility, getting around, being able to have spaces. And this is something that I think faith communities have to work on more, is accessibility, the physical accessibility of our spaces, also accessibility to people who need different accommodations when we're doing. Not every child can sit through a 2-hour service. There's just those realities of different learning styles. So I just wanted to kind of share that was this idea of community care and community spaces, and that our mental health is tied in many ways to our ability to have relationships over our lifespan. And I think that's really a powerful part of community care, and why faith communities are important in the conversation with libraries, is because they are forms of communities, and libraries are sort of a community of larger communities. So if we get to know our neighbors, or we find a way, one of my friends is a dean at a local university, and he said his most popular class for his incoming, not a formal academic course, but his most popular class is how to make a friend. And I think that says a lot about the reality of people being able to connect and have the time and the space. And I think a lot of people are hungry for that, particularly after the pandemic. And so whatever role you have in your life, is there a way that we can build those connections? And each person in a different part of the lifespan has unique challenges to that. It could be that people are just really busy working, and so I just want to kind of share that as thinking about the connection between community and care, and how do we really build intentional inclusion in whatever role we have in our own professional or volunteer community space.
Yes.
That was awesome. That was for sure. If I was compared to an attendance match, it would be like a long rally of a conversation. So I really appreciate that I got to sit in and listen to this. So any other comments to this question that maybe you don't remember anymore, but it was what do you find challenging and rewarding? And I think we talked about, or you guys talked about everything in all aspects of the life. So that was a great ride. So our next question is, I think, could be a difficult one. What's a misconception the public might have about your role?
I thought you were going to say what's a misconception they have about our community. And I don't know about the two of you, but I would venture a guess that you might have the same answer, which is that we're a monolithic community, right? There's a lot of variance and diversity within us. I might be going out on a limb here, but we might share that idea. Let me think about what are common misconceptions about rabbis, like who rabbis are, what we do, or what. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
This is actually my colleague's question, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna say, however you want to take this question, please do. Throw it back to your card.
I'll begin.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I'll begin. I would say one of the misconceptions is I have the title of spiritual advisor. That means I am a prayer man. I'm not a healer. There are individuals in the Indian nation who are known as roadmen, men and women. And what they do is travel from the reserves into the urban settings and bring medicine and healing that they have established among their own people and clan through the millennia. And they are roadmen. And then, of course, you have certain people that think I am a medicine man, which I am not. I'm not a sacred medicine healer that do exist among the tribes. I am a spiritual advisor and the head man of my family. I am a prayer man and a singer of songs. And I perform these songs, which are rituals, with individuals that I know now are willing to accept these songs to bring them peace, or to participate in the prayers, to bring themselves spiritual healing, and reunite them with something greater. Because that's so very important. Spirituality is everything. So the misconception that usually I am questioned about is where I am in this realm of healing. I'm a prayer man, spiritual advisor. I listen. I'm not a counselor because I do not speak. When they are speaking to me, I listen to them. And I don't bring revelations to them or present revelations to them because I know deep inside they each have the answer. Particularly when I speak to veterans who are struggling with addiction issues, whether it's self-medicating, alcohol, I know they have the answer and it lies within them. But sometimes they need to talk to an elder, someone out of their circle, their family. And I think that's when the healing, that's when I, as a spiritual advisor, are most important. And that's my role. And I believe the professor mentioned that we have to listen. We have to listen. And that can provide such a connection to them to want to better themselves, even if it's just one day, that they can become a better human being. Thank you.
I think it's interesting being a professor. I remember one of the first times I taught, and afterwards one of the students came up to me and they said, I didn't know that you're funny. And I said, oh, really? What do you mean by that? And she said, well, I didn't know Muslim women were allowed to be funny. I was like, oh, I didn't know that, So the reason I share that story, and then the student ended up being, a wonderful student to teach, is that there's just, you never know what people, but we never know how people interpret us as human beings in whatever setting that we're in. And when she said that, I was thinking, I wonder, is it that maybe all the images she has of people from my religious tradition are that they're very serious, or maybe that's the image she has of religious people in general, that people who have a religious orientation are just really, I don't know, don't smile and apparently don't make jokes. And then or does she just think like she had such a low bar for humor that a few jokes made her really happy to be in class? So I just wanted to kind of share about when we are in places of difference, like tonight we have people from 4 different backgrounds. So sometimes our differences are based on spirituality, sometimes they're based on gender, sometimes they're based on meaning, like there's just so many different experiences of how people are in the world. It could be your profession. It could be so many different reasons that come to the table in which you have a particularized experience. And what I would encourage people is when you come and engage with someone, like I think the student felt comfortable saying that to me. That might not have been the most effective way in another setting, but I think it was in that particular setting, I was able to kind of talk her through her own perception. But, I think there are ways to ask questions instead of making assumptions, because you can end up with interacting with someone and interpreting why they do something, especially if it looks different than what for instance, there are different ways that we dress based on our spirituality or religious tradition. There are different ways that we refer to the divine. One of the things is sometimes I imagine we worship as Muslims in Arabic. I'm not Arab. I'm from Kashmir, from South Asia, came to the US. I had to learn Arabic to be able to worship in my tradition. Rabbi Miller worships, I'm assuming, mostly in Hebrew. I don't know the many languages potentially that Roy or that you utilize in your spiritual practice. But I wanted to kind of open that up, because sometimes what seems strange is maybe it's just in a different language. Like Muslims use the word Allah, that means the God, and people don't know that if they don't understand Arabic, and they think that's something different, like it may mean something completely different than what it means. So what I've found is when we're engaging with difference is to be patient, to have empathy, and to ask questions in a way that instead of putting it on the other person, put it on yourself, to say, I don't really know about that. Can you tell me more? Or what's the story behind that practice? Or, I've seen this before, and I don't know I don't quite understand. But put it on you, like I'm the one that doesn't, I'm the one that would like to know more, and do it in a way that's friendly and engaging instead of value judgment, to say like, that's really weird what you're doing. I've never seen that before. Like that's a different kind of way to approach it versus, so I just kind of wanted to open up the door to thinking about how we engage difference, both to be curious and to be generous in our answering and generous in our sharing. And I'm so glad you've created this space tonight, because I feel like it is one of those spaces where you can ask those questions. I'll just wrap up. I had my students do something called Stupid Questions, where there are different religious traditions. And I told them, listen, tonight, you can ask any question, but it was anonymous. So they wrote out the questions, and then we put them in like a kind of just a container. And then I just pulled them out one by one, and we asked questions. And thinking about like, it was funny and they laughed, but it took me a long time to build trust with the students and create that environment. But do we have places where we can learn? And that's where things like accessing books and information and other ways about different spiritual practices Another thing that I really encourage people to think about is not just spiritual and religious stress, but holidays are a great way to learn about other traditions. Know who's in your workplace, in your community, in your church, learn about, or your mosque. And I think that's a really good way to connect, because most holidays are either connected, at least in the Muslim tradition, to some kind of eating or fasting. So we fast, but then we break our fast and celebrate. They're connected to coming together in community. They're connected to some kind of memory of our spiritual practices. Sometimes they're connected to building peace in our community so that people come together. We don't gather just to say hi, we gather to build peace and check in with one another. So I would just encourage all of us to think about ways that we could learn about and across difference in a way that's open, curious, and non-judgmental. Someone in the chat is saying food is so powerful. Breaking bread with people is such a good way to learn about each other too. So I just kind of wanted to open the door to that way of getting to know about one another.
Yes.
Yes to food. And yes to also, I mean, speaking of dispelling myths about our, our people, our traditions, a lot of people think that we all keep kosher. That is not true. We do not all keep kosher, Jews in general, even rabbis. So just, I'll try and hit a few of the kind of low hanging fruit, the like questions that I get a lot that people are like surprised by. Because if you go on any search engine, right, and you look up like rabbi and you click like image, you might be surprised to see my face there, right? Or you might be surprised, you might not be surprised that it's not in the Google search engine right away. But there's a certain image of what a rabbi looks like or is, who a Jewish person looks like or is. So we are, again, not monolithic. We come from all walks of life. People ask, if women can become rabbis. Yes, women can become rabbis. Actually, one of the first women rabbis was named Regina Jonas, and she was ordained in Germany in 1939. She perished in the Holocaust. Actually, last week was her yard site, so I'll lift her name up in loving memory. But then in America, the first woman rabbi was in the Reform movement in 1972, Rabbi Sally Priesand. So there have been women rabbis for a long time. There are multiple denominations of Judaism. People, when I was younger, would ask, you look very young to be a rabbi. Well, in our text, there's someone who says in the Mishnah, he says that, you may have a young bottle with old wine in it, or an old bottle with not even new wine in it, right? So I was ordained at 29. I know people who were ordained earlier than that. So that I don't think age reflects ability to reflect. So I just want to put that. I know that we've talked a lot about that here today. Do you drink? That's another question sometimes people ask. Yes, it's my job. We always lift up wine and say l'chaim. Wine is a symbol of joy. Some of us have a very low tolerance, so we would lift up any fruit of the vine is okay. If I'm officiating a wedding and someone knows that like they cannot drink any fruit of the vine for because of addictions or because of medical diagnoses, we can substitute that. So the tradition would not place anyone's health in danger. And then on a serious note, right, I just came back from an international interfaith conference, and we were asked, Jewish, Muslim, and Christians, to share what our communities think of the other communities. Not an exercise for the faint-hearted. Right. And so I think it is very important in spaces like these to dispel myths like, Jews have power, Jews have money. Of course, certain Jews have power, certain Jews have some money. But I just want to draw that out because I think it is incredibly dangerous. We know that Rabbi Charlie Citron, who is a colleague of mine, was in Colleyville in Texas. And someone took him hostage and others in his community. And the person thought literally the Jews had all of this power that they could simply take over this place, have him call this famous rabbi and have her talk with the president of the United States and like change things the way that he wanted. And those kinds of myths, when we talk about, you know, dispelling stereotypes, is really important. So I'm just going to pull that out as something for people to learn more about the dangers of those kinds of myths about the Jewish community, in particular, just because you asked, and I'm sure others have other myths to bust. I see in the chat someone saying very cool myth busting about faith leaders. Yes, and faith.
One thing that I think is really interesting too is about, do we have interfaith friendships? Because actually one of the best ways, there's religion in the text, and then there's what we call lived religion, which is how people actually live out their spirituality. And if you only study someone else's text, it's not going to give you the full picture of how they practice. And so I think one of the things I wanted to share, especially in this moment, is Rabbi Heather Miller and I are good friends, and we were at an event yesterday where we did blessings for LA Fashion Week, which was very interesting. There was also an indigenous flute player and a Hindu practitioner. And what I wanted to point out is that for the friendship that Heather and I have, Rabbi Miller and I have, is it's not just exchanging information about our religious traditions. I've learned a lot about Judaism from her. She has fasted she hasn't fasted in Ramadan, but she's broken her fast. In Ramadan, Muslims fast for 30 days consecutively during the time that the sun is up in the sky. They don't fast when the sun is down. But it's that kind of being able to also just build friendships with each other. And I think that's been really powerful, because when there are times when things are difficult, when there are challenges, we're able to call each other up. If there are challenges to our communities, to be able to talk to each other. You know, I was thinking about, like, in particular, unfortunately, in the LA County area, there was a hate crime against my mosque, and then there was an attack of a synagogue. And what I always tell people is, don't wait till the crisis to build that relationship. Don't wait till there's been harm to a community to build that relationship. Spend time together before you get to that point, so that the first time you meet someone of a different religious community who may be your neighbor, it's really hard once there has been something really damaging that starts the opening of that. So I just want to encourage people, when we can, to build those relationships. And I wanted to move really quickly to something else. Is some people have multiple practices. They can be Christian and also do indigenous practices, or they could be something else and meditate. They can meditate in a Buddhist practice. So I also wanted to kind of just mention that, because that's also important to understand, that the way that I identify in my religious community is that I'm Muslim. I don't really have other identities, but we do have people that may be ground, or you could have relationships where someone is of two different, there are people of different traditions. So I wanted to point out that a lot of people think, like, oh, interfaith or multi-faith spaces have to be these big, bringing of two big communities together, but there's so many small spaces in our lives that are already so religiously diverse. So I wanted to point that out as well, just the importance of friendship before there's a crisis, so that we can be supportive of each other. And also just to recognize, like, whether it's a family, whether it's people doing multiple practices, that there's especially in Southern California, that there's such a wide range of options and practices, that you might see people that have connection. Maybe someone was raised in one tradition and then ended up, we're at a time in the United States where people may move between traditions much more than they ever did before. So I just wanted to kind of mention that too, is that you may walk into a room and not know how, I call it invisible diversity. Just based on your perception, you may not realize how diverse that room is until people tell their stories to you, or you get to the point of trust that they can share those stories.
Yes.
Thank you, Najeeba. So I realized that I've totally lost track of time listening to you guys. So I do apologize to the audience. It looks like we may not be able to take some questions, but I'm sure that the audience is agreeing with me. We do want to listen more from, or we do want to hear more about what you guys are talking about. Do you guys have any last statements before we close the program? And again, I apologize for but yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for that.
Well, I would like to say one thing. I think we're a wonderful country, a young country, a beautiful land. But and I'm just saying this from my perspective. The United States of America is not a culture. It has none. We are the people that bring that. Our religious beliefs, our values, we bring that. And we're a country of many backgrounds, many religious beliefs from many cultures. And I think we need to shed light on that so our youth will come out and start to feel comfortable again in the world that belongs to them.
I think one of my closing comments is that I think there needs, in my work, I call it spiritual, religious, and worldview diversity, that you don't have to have a spiritual or religious perspective to have relationships and conversations around values and shared values. And I really want to open up the door to that, because we call people who kind of don't identify with any religious identity are often called unaffiliated, or people that may not have a belief in God at all are also, there's space. I think there needs to be space for everyone in this conversation. And particularly, I think the reason I mention that is because I think we benefit when we don't just address religious diversity, but we also address worldview diversity. So someone could be deeply motivated. For instance, I was mentioning like the issue of working with our unhoused neighbors. Someone could be deeply motivated to do that work, but they may not have a religious and spiritual grounding. They may have a moral imperative to do that. So how do we think about in LA County the many challenges that we face as opportunities to work together and make space for people that have a common value? They may not have they may not have a religious belief. And I just want to put that out there so that we don't create spaces where people who have a spiritual and religious value are devalued, but also it's important to speak up and make space for people who don't have, and don't see that as a deficit, but to see that they're coming as whole human beings with their own perspective, and that there are ways that we can have these conversations and learn about one another and hopefully solve problems together that are so dire in our time.
And I'll just follow up with, the importance of getting out there and learning about each other, and not as specimens. I just want to put that out there, like, especially as a white person who goes into spaces and learns about people and diversity and has friends and whatnot. Like, it's important to just put yourself in a space to share of who you are, and to understand that someone else is sharing of who they are, right? And not to exotify in that way, but just to be present, and just to, again, like, be a good friend, right? And I just want to thank the library for this space, because I think especially with the events of this past week, someone in the chat asked about it, so just going to touch on it here, that Najeeba and I have been in lots of spaces this week together, actually not because of what's going on in the Middle East, but because we already were going to, because we're friends and we do a lot of interfaith work together in peace building. And so I think it's really important to show like authentic relationships across religious divides, but also like every one of the friends that you each have that are on the Zoom and in this space, right? We all have friends who have difference of some sort, whether it's age or gender or sexual orientation or religion, whatnot. And so just to, cherish that and so, but it almost feels radical to like have us both on these things, and thank you for creating this space so that we can be authentic and show people that coexistence and affirming one another and supporting one another across religious traditions, with Roy included, of course, and you, Kasha, that that so much of the news cycle is all of the challenge part of it, and it's really important that we show people that again, it's not a monolithic experience. It's not our team versus your team. It's that there is a very large group of people who have authentic relationships across all kinds of difference, and that's a beautiful thing about Los Angeles, especially. That I think we do that better than many places.
All right, thank you so much. I'm so glad that this is recorded. That way we can share with our friends about this amazing conversation that happened here. And I'm just honored that you guys have taken your time and made yourself vulnerable and shared your experiences and your faith and like what you do. So thank you again. And I just want to point out that if you haven't signed up for the next session, please do. I hope that the next one will be just as amazing as tonight's. And I thank you to the audience and to the moderator, Isabel Briggs. And with that, I wish you guys a wonderful night. And we hope to see you soon in our libraries and in the Zoom space. Have a nice one.
We know where, yeah, 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 yeah. We know where, yo, yo. We know where, yeah, 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 yeah. We know where, yo, yo. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Roy. Have a nice one.
Good night, everyone.